So why don't you start us off? What do we mean by freedom teaching?
Yeah, absolutely. Titling a book is perhaps one of the most challenging things that you can do in the entire process. And so we came to the name Freedom Teaching because it really encapsulated what the book is about. And so we believe that freedom teaching are deliberate acts that enhance the freedom of children, both inside of the classrooms, but then also the freedom that they have to lead choice-filled lives. One of the things that systemic racism, classism, or oppression more broadly limits for children is their choices. In society, the privileges we have significantly dictate the choices we can make. For some families, they can choose what they eat every night for dinner and whether or not that's nutritious. They can choose whether or not they send their kid to a high achieving school. They can choose whether or not they live in a safe community. They can choose what type of access to healthcare they have. For many other people, as a consequence of these systems of oppression, those choices are much more limited, or in some cases, a person may feel like they don't have choices at all. And what we found in our work in schools is that, especially in urban communities, oftentimes freedom is de-emphasized, and children find themselves in school spaces that are more so about control. And so we thought, how can we educate kids in ways that deliberately enhance their freedom in schools? And as a consequence of that, deliberately enhances the freedom that they have as they have to navigate the systems of the world. And so that's what freedom teaching is: deliberate actions that enhance the freedom of children.
So is this book for students or is this more for educators?
More so for educators. Also, we've gotten a lot of feedback that is great for parents as well. A lot of the kind of philosophies that are represented in the book also can be really beneficial for parents. So pretty much anyone who is in the action of working to raise children. And I believe that one of the goals of education should be to also that we're helping to raise children well. And so anyone who is a steward of children, the book should have something for them.
I like that. I wanted to clarify that because when I'm listening to you explain it as far as like what does like freedom teaching, I start thinking about like, okay, are we teaching our students to be able to kind of do their, be themselves or are we encouraging our educators or our parents, I guess, to have them make sure that they are able to express themselves in the way that they want? Is that the freedom that we're talking about?
A little bit, right? I think one of the things that the book talks about is that oftentimes in the context of the United States, we think about freedom as this solely individualistic ideal, right? In the United States, we talk a lot about things like rugged individualism and pulling oneself up by their bootstraps. And schooling structures oftentimes follow this model. The model is more or less about, hey, you go to school, you get an education, so one day you can be successful and you can take better care of your family. But when it comes to communities of color and traditionally oppressed communities, freedom has always been an ideal that is shared. And so the book talks a lot about how we can build community in school, how we can build solidarity in school, how students understand that the students in the classroom in a lot of ways are the first part of their network that they're going to continue to be building as they grow and get older. And instead of students thinking about education being solely an individualistic pursuit, the success of the student to my right and to my left also impacts my success. And so how can we build schools that are more so communities? Book Freedom Teaching kind of breaks that down as well. And so students don't feel like they're on an island on a school, but instead students feel like they're part of a team or a family.
I love this. So that they feel like they're part of a team, part of a family. And I think that's really important. So there's a piece that's really stood out to me within the book, and it's all about cognitive empowerment. So I wanted to really hone in on that today, as far as what does that look like? Obviously, we want folks to, you're going to give us the Cliff Notes version. We want folks to really dig into it. But you can kind of just break that down a little bit for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. The book, one of the major inputs of what we believe freedom teaching is promoting schools or creating schools and classrooms where students are cognitively empowered. We talk a lot in schools about whether a kid is a high level learner or a low level learner, or what their reading level is, or what their MAP test score is. We talk a lot about students from this perspective of quote unquote, how smart they are. And oftentimes a young person's smarts is defined by this kind of dominant culture or Eurocentric lens. We don't think about the cultural wealth that students bring into the classroom. We don't think about the knowledges, the funds of knowledges from home that students bring to the classroom. Oftentimes that's a currency that our kids have that is just not valued or accepted in schools. And cognitive empowerment is more so about this idea that every kid is smart. It's about whether or not we recognize the multiple different types of genius that young people bring into classrooms. Every kid's genius is not going to be represented in filling bubbles in on a Scantron. And for kids that are really great at that, that's phenomenal. And I'm not, anti-Scantron, but I'm just saying that school has a responsibility to meet children where they are. And so cognitive empowerment is about building schools in which we teach kids to be critical thinkers, building schools where we teach students about not just what they know or what they're learning, but how that's relevant to their lived experience, how that's relevant to the choices that they'll have to make to lead a successful life. Teaching cognitive empowerment is about working to build students who take risks, students who question, students who are creative and innovative in terms of problem solving, right? Because oftentimes school becomes this compliance task. It's like I show up. I mean, even for the most successful students in classes, especially in urban schools, it's like our expectation for them is show up, sit down, be quiet, write down what the teacher takes on the board, retain as much of it as you possibly can, regurgitate it on a test. And if you can do that, check, you're successful. What does it have to do with you being financially literate? What does it have to do with you understanding the nuances of the structures that exist in society? What does it have to do with you being able to interpret which sources of information are quality sources of information and trustworthy and which ones aren't? What does it have to do with you navigating a conflict you may have in a relationship with a parent or a peer? There are all these soft skills that make up the ecosystem of a school. And so students who are cognitively empowered apply their learning to their lived experience versus just, learning being this kind of competition about who can play the game best enough to then eventually get into a college. And then maybe 4 years after you get into that college, you'll graduate. And then once you graduate, then, your whole entire life will change. I think that's a value proposition for kids that, especially in today's day and age where they have literally the entire world at their fingertips as a means of their cell phone. I just think it's an outdated value proposition of school. If we can't make school meaningful and relevant to kids' lived experiences right now, we're going to lose them. Because whatever's happening on TikTok, I guarantee is more interesting than what is happening in most of our classrooms.